All right, so what we're going to look at here are just the basics, the same things we talked about early on in the term. That would be shape, angle, proportion, relationship, and light. So we have a photograph. It's a very simple photograph. We could get easily overwhelmed by all the information, though. There are all these things stacked up on one another, and how do we keep track of all of that? Well, we break it down, bite-size it. So we've got shape first. Let's look at the shapes we have here. We have an oval, very simple oval in our spoon. We have a rectangle here, a little tapered rectangle with a little rounded end. Triangle. It's a little fat on the end, but still, it's basically a triangle. It doesn't have to be perfect shapes. We're just talking general shapes. This is kind of an oval. The carrot is a bit of an oval, and then it straightens out into a bit of a rectangle on the end. We've got ellipses here. We talked about ellipses quite a bit, remember that? And we have ellipses going here on the carrot and on the bottom of the carrot. I actually ate half this carrot, so it's not like it's going all the way through the bowl and into the bottom of the planet here. It's just a half a carrot. Again, here we have an oval. Look at the end of these. It's a perfect little oval. Piece of cake. And then we add a rectangle to that. And you've got the bottom of an onion, and a curved sort of a rectangle keeps going up. More rectangle, more rectangle. This is a rectangle, but it's been covered up by half that onion. But still, you can imagine where that goes behind. Curved, but still a rectangular basic format. Here we've got a bunch of ellipses, a bunch of ovals. They're a little more egg-shaped than elliptical. We just stack them all on one another, and before you know it, you've got some ginger. This is kind of a rectangle shape here, and this is kind of a rectangle shape there. What else do we have? We have the big kahuna, which is the ellipse here. It's a little bit distorted because of the photograph and just the angle of the camera and all of that. In reality, it would have all the same measurements quadrilinearly there. So that's the objects at hand. We've got this wonderful little curve here. That's the basic shapes. The angles are often in the negative space is where you find those to be really helpful. If you want to figure out where things are positioned against one another, you can look at the angles. Here we have this wonderful little triangle, another triangle here, and another triangle here. If you just get the triangles right, you'll get the shapes right. We have the shadow shape is mimicking the bowl, by the way. When we talk shapes, we're also talking shapes of shadows. Angles. We have the chopsticks are coming from left to right, or right to left, depending upon which way you're looking at it or coming at it. But they're on a distinct angle from the edges. The angle here is not an equal angle. It's a little wider at the bottom than it is at the top. And then that leaves us with this lovely little triangle here. And if we get that right, we know a lot more information. Let's see what other angles we have. Let's see, I'm looking. I suppose we could measure this as an angle. I find I'd rather focus on the shapes there. The angle of the napkin as it comes against the edge, you can use the edge of the paper as a straight line, and then you can figure out what your angles are there. When we talk proportions, we're basically talking about how things relate to one another. So we can use positioning based on the edges of our paper. So I've got this length here. Where do I want to put my onion? It's not quite to the halfway point. So proportionally, it's almost to the halfway point. This is almost, this comes off, this little green here comes off almost at the quarter point. Proportions are how things relate to one another. How big is this head relative to this? The head of the spoon, the top of the spoon is about the same as the fat part of the spoon. So by saying that, we know we have kind of 3/3, and that the tapering is going to happen in that middle third. Let's see. This is a little wider at the bottom. You could look at that and how much wider. You just kind of make this come down straight and this come down straight, and you see it's about 1/3 wider. That helps you kind of figure out your shapes and your sizes. When we talk relationships, this is the one that's really, really big. It's really important, and it's going to help you if you let it. That has to do with how things are positioned in relationship to each other. So here I've got my napkin. That's an easy one to nail. It's a straight line and it comes just to the left of the center point. I can put that in. Now I look at this shape. Relationship-wise, this curve almost touches the napkin. I bring it down. That triangle shape tells me where to bring that in. Here, I've got some of the bowl shows through here. I can see that edge of the bowl. That helps me understand how these two areas come down to meet. That little bit comes off the onion at about the same place. See this little shape here where it's lighter? Just the same angle, but a little bit over is the edge of your ginger. The bottom of the carrot comes off right about at this point where the white turns into green on the onion. So I'm looking at how things compare. When I want to do the chopsticks, I'm looking at my oval. Got my oval. And about a third of the way down and about a third of the way up is where the chopsticks meet it. If I can get that correct, then I've given myself enough information to step ahead and work on the next area. Let's see. The ginger hits about halfway into the bowl here, so that helps me position that. And here, and it's all, you can always use these mathematical things. You can grid things out to make it easier. So the bottom of the ginger is a little bit below halfway through the center of the bowl, and you could treat it like a clock. You kind of got about a 2:30 bulb here, and you've got about a 1:30 bulb here, and about a 1 o'clock bulb there. That tells you where it is relative to the bowl. So that's relationships. Light is a pretty easy one here. It happens to be coming from over here. We can tell that because we've got the main highlights here. Here are our highlights. Here, there's enough highlight there. We can't even see detail. And big kahuna is because we see the shadow here. If the shadow is here, the light has to be opposite from that. So we're going to put in our little sun mark, just to make it easy to remember, and that way things will always be consistent. This is where you can see that this shape does not meet. It's up and away from the foundation, from the background, by this shadow here. See how far away the shadow is from the object? That's because it's not lying right against it. It's up away, so light gets beneath, and the angle is such that you get that perspective, and the shadow is way over here. So even in shadows, we're looking at shapes, and the light source gives us, the strength of the light source gives us different kinds of shadows. This is a softer shadow than this because this is closer to the object. See how when the napkin pulls up, it's higher than the background surface. When that pulls up, the shadow shifts. The shadow goes all the way down under the napkin here, but because this is higher, the shadow doesn't start until here on the napkin itself. So by paying attention to the shapes of the shadows and where the light is coming from, you can talk about the depth of the item or what the shape of the item is. So I hope that's basically helpful. Shape, angle, proportion, relationship, and light. So I'm going to try to give this a quick sketch, and what we do is we start with those very items. I don't think you'll be able to see what I can see so well right now, but that's really kind of beside the point. So I'm not going to use the edge of the paper. I like to have my own edge when I'm going to draw. I'm not going to worry about whether that's perfectly straight at this point, just because that gives me a chance to make little marks like this. Where are my center points and things like that. So already I have that greenery coming down. The first thing I would establish is where that bowl is. And the bowl starts about a quarter of the way down from the top, and it's in from the side, and it's up from the bottom, but not quite a quarter. And then it's about a third of the way in from the center point. And now I need to make my ellipse. And remember, ellipses do not have sharp points. They don't have sharp edges. And since my photo skewed things a little bit, I have to decide if I'm going to correct that. And see, I'm going to just keep going until I start to feel like it's right. I don't have to make every mark be perfect. I develop it as I'm going. And right now I'm just trying to figure out what goes where. So here's my center point, here's my onion. It's going to come in, and I can see that it's about a quarter of the way up from there. The shape, I've got my rectangular shape. That's going to be there. This one comes straight up, and then there's that little where the white part ends and the green part begins, and that's the spot where this beautiful little curved shape comes up and around. I'm just going to kind of nail that shape, not worrying about whether it's perfect yet. The second onion comes down a little further. See how there's this joining point? I don't know if you can see that, but there's this joining point here. And you can see the whole bulb, but then remember half of that is covered up by the other onion. And now I'm looking for the shape of the triangle. I need to move this over a little bit because I need a little more of this triangle area here to show if I want to make this accurate. You're also allowed as an artist to make things not exactly as you see them. You can make them better than what you see. These have little things coming off the bottom. I'm not going to worry about exactly what they look like right now. So the carrot, I'm going to look at, the carrot's coming off at about 3 o'clock. And it hits the onion right about at noon there, right about in the center. It was a really good carrot. It was a little sweet, a little crunchy. Here are my ellipses. The ellipse, the angle of the ellipse is going to change depending upon the angle of the object I'm looking at. There's this growth stuff at the top that just comes off the side of the bowl. And at this point, I might start to determine what some of my shadow shapes are. And just lightly tick that in so I can start to get a feeling for the depth of this whole piece. These are interesting shadows coming off the onions. They curve around the shape of the bowl. It's a curved shape, so you're going to get curved shadows. That's okay. It's actually what you want. Now we've got this ginger thing. So I've got my 1 o'clock ginger bulb. There's my bulb. There's my fat bulb that comes off the top. And there's another one there at about, I don't remember what o'clock that was. This one overlaps right here, and it's very handy to have that overlap because it gives me a reference point of how big it is, where it comes on the other one. Helps me see what I'm working with. And there's that last little finger of the ginger. Ginger has these lines, and what the lines are going to do are follow the curve of the shape. And that helps you give it form, which is pretty cool. So we're going to have ellipses again that are following that shape. Alright. They're not perfect. They don't go all the way around. They doesn't make rings necessarily all the way around, but alright, so what do we have left in the bowl? It has a lip. The bowl has a lip. So I want to kind of get that shape established, the thickness of that bowl. I'm going to pull it around. Notice pushing and pulling a pencil are very, very different experiences, so I have to be careful. I'm not going to have the same feeling when I'm pushing as when I'm pulling. So sometimes I break it out into smaller marks. So what I'm doing is using what I have as a guide, but I'm cleaning it up. I'm getting it more correct as I go. Alright, so now I can move over. My napkin is going to be my next little guide point. It comes up right near that green onion, if you'll recall. Comes off the page on the side. I want to see what's going on down here. I have a couple of surfaces happening here. It's been folded and all that. And now we might as well put that shadow in that we were talking about that comes below the napkin here, but resumes higher up here. The important part about this shadow is that we completely lose the chopsticks in it. You can't even see them. And that does happen. You don't have to draw it if you can't see it. You can put them there. We've got a couple of rectangles here. Easy enough to draw. Not a big deal. I don't have to worry about getting it perfect though in here because I can't even see it. Little points. Now I got my spoon. Spoons are such fun to draw. Not as easy as they look, but I got to get my oval just right. Perspective is going to be an interesting thing. Remember my proportions. I probably already made my spoon a little too long, so I'm going to pull that up a bit. Because when I'm looking at proportions, I remembered that it was a third and a third. So if I go a third, and a third with my rounded, tapered rectangle and my triangle there, and I can get that shape right. Not so hard. Again, the shadow's kind of cool here. I make the shape of the shadow. It comes away from the object, and by coming away from the object, that tells us that this object is up and off the surface. It tells us the three-dimensionality of all that. The shape, remember when we did shadows, the shape of this, it's a straight object, but the shape of the shadow is not, which tells me that the fabric that it's on is not flat. All of this is information you can use. Then I'm going to just kind of lightly indicate where my shadows are. And all of a sudden it starts to get a little bit of dimension going. So now I know basically where my information is. I've got a light source established. I'm going to try to get it in here now, the bowl. The rim of the bowl is not going to be in shadow, but just below that rim, significantly in shadow. The shape and darkness and edge of this will tell you the depth of the bowl. The fact that it's a nice dark shadow means the bowl has pretty high sides. If it were a shallower bowl, the shadow would not be so dark, and the changes from one end to the other would not be so dramatic. And it stays pretty dark. If I look carefully, it stays pretty dark until it's done. And it's a little straighter than I thought. There's a little decorative item on the bottom of the bowl. I'm just going to tick that in for fun. It wouldn't have to be there. It's not important to the piece. So now I want to look at the shadows a little bit on my objects. The edge of the greenery here has a shadow. I definitely need to have shadow here because I have an object sticking up. So there's going to be shadow behind that. And my light source is over here. So my highlights are going to lie in that area. It's orange, it's not white, so I should probably give it some tone. Notice how lightly I'm drawing. I'm barely touching. I'm just barely touching. And this is sort of a crosshatchy thing. Sometimes I do crosshatch, sometimes I don't. A crosshatch is a nice way to just build up the surface without over-committing to what you're doing. You can always add more directions, and at some point you get comfortable, and then you can just start to go back and forth and scribble. The onions have a little facet here where it's like a triangular shape, straight spot. It doesn't go around the onion perfectly, sort of wrapping kind of a way. There's a little extra. It's almost like paper-like, so it folds in a crisp angle kind of a thing. So I want to show that by having a sharper shadow. I want to indicate the tone that goes from light to dark to light, and this varies a little bit. It's almost a stripy pattern in the onion, and then it's going to get white near the bottom. Same thing with this. This is a lighter onion, so I'm not going to put as much color in. Here we've got a nice strong shadow for the side of this shape. It's a very simple, sort of squared off tube. And I have tone for color, and then I have darker tone for, because green is a darker value, I'm going to put some tone in to indicate that color. Same thing here, where I've got a pretty solid shadow, but a very thin one here. Here it's a little broader, so the shadow doesn't hit until later, and then the shape shifts. And I can see that by the shape of the shadow. Now this triangle is important. It's a very dark triangle, and by being so dark, it really helps us understand the depth of the bowl. I need to bring that up a little bit. I can tell because of the shape of the triangle. And I need to darken these shadows to start to meet the value of the other shadows that I had. See how the onion, this curvy, this beautiful, I love this little curve, is my favorite part. That little shape is right against the bowl, so it's next to the onion shape, whereas the other shadow for the onion is over here. and comes right across the chopsticks. And it follows the shape of the chopsticks a little bit too. All right, so we can spend a lot of time getting into the finer details. I just want to get you to think about the basics of the drawing, getting your shapes in place first, getting your angles that'll help you figure out what's where, figuring out how to find things relative to other things. Where do they lie compared to each other? And then where your light source is, because once you know your light source is, then you can start to give things 3 dimension. There's no 3-dimensionality without a light source. There's nothing without a light source, remember that? So, let's see, I would darken this. Give this a little tone here. So you build it in stages. You don't say, oh, I'm going to draw that dark right away, because everything is relative. Light and dark is also relative to each other. So if you overcommit to a shadow too early, you might have set yourself up for a problem relative to another object. So build your shadows over time. Don't just commit to them right off the bat. And then you can say, oh, I can take that darker. It's much harder to bring it lighter than it is to just build it up slowly. Interesting how those chopsticks do disappear. So I'm going to commit to the shadow first. The spoons are tricky. You have to watch out for the highlights. We're definitely going to have a strong highlight on this edge. It's metal, so it's going to be nice, sharp highlights. This shows us our curve. The fact that this is lit here, this is the lightest area, shows us the shape of that bowl. It's also, however, reflecting things, like I'm actually seeing my own face here in the spoon, which I'm not going to draw, but it's there. It's a dark thing. It throws us off a little bit because it's not really part of the spoon. It's just a reflection of the spoon. But for it to be credible, we have to kind of draw everything we see, because metallic objects do reflect the things around them. All right, so we'll give that a strong shadow because it needs it, nice and sharp next to the object where it's touching, a little softer where it's not. And then we can look at the shape of this. It's kind of interesting how, even though it's a rectangle, the shape of the highlight is not quite a rectangular shape. So what I'm going to do is not say, oh, that has to be a rectangular shape because it's a rectangle. I'm going to look at it and draw what I see. And by drawing what I see, it'll end up looking like it's supposed to look. That's a leap of faith, but you'll get used to it by doing it. So I hope this was at least moderately helpful. This is what I'd like you to do for your assignment, for your Thanksgiving assignment. You're going to pick your dish of choice, whatever you like to eat out of, and that's different for everybody. Fill it with something. It can either be ingredients or it can be, I don't care if it's toys, I don't care what you put on your plate or in your bowl. You want to have at least 3 items. And then I want you to sketch it. I want you to sketch it using shape and proportion and angles and light and relationships. And seriously remember how all these things work together. Lightly sketch it, then gradually build it up until you have a more finished piece. And I would take it even further than what I've done here. I'm not going to take all the time it would take because you don't have that much time in the film even, but I want you to develop this piece until it feels like it's got some depth and some character to it. So notice how some of the lines are sharp and some of the lines are soft. And by playing those against one another, you can create all kinds of interesting surface. I want to harden that edge just because I want to give it a little stronger sense of volume. I'm also going to darken this yet farther. I'm just not happy with that shadow yet. And it's a brown bowl, so I'm going to put some tone in there. It's not a black and white photo with some shadows. All of this has color. So where there's color, I have to put some bit of something in there. And the minute I do that, I have to darken my shadow again because it's relative. This shadow is nice and dark compared to white. But when I darken the areas around it, then I have to darken the shadow even farther to be able to have the same impact. All right, so I'm going to quit. You guys can go try this, and I know you're going to do great because you've been getting better and better as you go. All right, happy Thanksgiving.